UFC Louisville just went down this past weekend. Not necessarily the most amazing, jaw dropping night of fights, but there were still plenty of moments that we are going to remember. And with that, let's go through them. You guys know the drill. I'm going to recap the whole card, start to finish. First fight was Puja Tomar versus Hayani Amanda, who's now Hayani Dos Santos. Tomar won the split decision. Um, Honestly, I thought Hayani Amanda did enough to win the fight. Puja Tomar was being backed up, being pressured, evading strikes, and the only counter that she truly had was a side kick to the body. And I mean, she landed it, but she did not damage Hayani Amanda with that kick whatsoever. It was more so to keep her safe than to dish out damage. So it was a good win for Puja Tomar. It wasn't a bad fight by any means. I question the decision is all. Nonetheless, we move on. Taylor Lapilus versus Cody Stamann. I mean, this fight went almost exactly how I predicted it to. Lapilus was able to counter grapple Cody Stamann and be one step ahead of him on the strikes. He was beating him to the punch a majority of the fight. He was actually showing some advantages in the grappling at points when they were locking up and over-unders and stuff like that and striking out of the clinch and stuff like that. So it was a good win for Taylor Lapilus. He's been around this game for a minute, so I'm very curious to see if he eventually works his way up into the rankings. Next, Eduardo Mora versus Denise Gomes. So this is another incorrect pick. But Eduardo Mora apparently missed weight, and I didn't realize this going in, and it definitely had an impact on her performance. But similar to Hayani Dos Santos versus Puja Tomar, I feel like Denise Gomes didn't necessarily do anything that warranted a win for her more so than Eduardo Mora, if that makes sense. There wasn't really a significant amount of damage from either side that was convincing enough to give the decision. So Denise Gomes got the split, but I feel like this fight could have gone either way. It was very obvious that Mora was slowing down as the fight progressed and that the bad weight cut and the weight miss impacted her performance. But yeah, I mean, as the fight progressed, Denise Gomes definitely took over. So a little bit of cope, but still. Good win from Denise Gomes. Eduardo Mora needs to get that weight cut in check so that her performances are better. Next, Daniel Marcos versus John Castaneda. I mean, Marcos looked polished. He was walking Castaneda down the whole fight. Marcos was in control of this fight for like 13 minutes and 30 seconds. No. 14 minutes. Total, 14 minutes. And then he ate a head kick from Castaneda. That same southpaw rear left leg high kick that he caught Daniel Santos with, and he couldn't get him out of there. Same thing happened with Daniel Marcos, but Marcos stayed safe, kept his distance, and rode out the clock until the fight ended and was granted the decision. He was similarly to Lapilus against Stamann. He was a step ahead against Castaneda. Castaneda wasn't necessarily able to get anything going in terms of offense on the feet. Marcos was picking his shots, picking his distance, and maintaining his posture. And it's a good win for Daniel Marcos. He remains undefeated, and I'm curious to see how many more fights he has before he's getting a ranked opponent. Montana De La Rosa versus Andrea Lee 2. I was so wrong. And I'm okay with that because De La Rosa's striking looked otherworldly improved compared to their first fight. And it showed because she was able to almost take over the fight as it progressed with her striking. I mean, her faint level change into the uppercut that she caught Andrea Lee with, I think that was the moment in the fight where she realized that she was almost in full control. And Andrea Lee tried her best. She tried to work her combinations, close the distance, and dictate the fight on her terms. But De La Rosa's striking, along with the threat of the takedown, was enough for her to control the fight and get that decision win. Good win for De La Rosa. I'm not sure what it necessarily does for her position in the division, but she won the rematch. It's now 1-1 between those two. Next, Brad Katona versus Jesse Butler. Katona did exactly what he was supposed to do against a longer, rangier opponent. He mixed the strikes into the takedowns, got Butler to the ground, kept him there, and controlled him, and did some damage from the top. It wasn't necessarily the most, eye-catching performance. It wasn't necessarily the most enjoyable performance, I guess you could say, but it was incredibly effective. He cruised to that decision. It was kind of similar to Grant Dawson versus Joe Selecki, but he did what he had to do. He knew going in the threat of fighting somebody longer than him, and he approached it with the perfect game plan. So good win for Brad Katona. Carlos Prates versus Charles Radke. I said it. I said Radke was going to have to mix in that wrestling emphatically in order to slow Prates down because of how explosive Prates is and how good he is at hiding his strikes. And Radke seemingly had the remedy early, but Prates was able to work his way back to the middle of the cage and, you know, open up on the feet and get comfortable with his strikes. And he was hiding his rear knee behind his left hand, and he caught Radke with it after setting it up perfectly to close out the first round. And it was a very impressive finish because the knee was so well placed and so well timed. You got to go back and watch it. It was a good win for Carlos Prates. Radke hung tough, and he was giving Prates problems for as long as the fight lasted, but that strike was just well placed and well set up. So next, Ludovic Klein versus Thiago Moises. Klein looked like a world beater in this fight, man. I mean, he hurt Moises in that first round with that high kick. Moises played the poker face really well, showed that he wasn't hurt, but then ate or left hand from Klein towards the end of that first round, and it sent him Bambi-legging to the ground. And he stayed safe, for the rest of the round, fought his way back to recovery, and rode out the round. But as the fight progressed, Klein was just in firm control all the way through. And there were definitely moments where he was implementing a similar style of game plan to how he approached Ignacio Bahamondes, especially when he started mixing in the grappling a little bit. But I mean, this was the type of performance I sort of expected from Klein. It was like a coming into his own performance. I feel like with a win like this, now he's maybe a fight or two away from getting somebody within the top 15. Next, Punahele Soriano versus Miguel Baeza. Completely wrong on this one, and I'm okay with that because Soriano looked very good going down to 170 pounds, and what I said regarding the weight cut impacting performance had nothing to do with Punahele Soriano's case because he went out there, used his wrestling, and dominated the fight from start to finish. Feel for Baeza, but he was just constantly trying to play jiu-jitsu off of his back, and against a smothering fighter with a wrestling background such as Puna, it's just not a good idea. And he paid for it with another loss, but nonetheless, Soriano's back in the win column at a new weight class, and it looked like that cut to 170 was pretty easy. So I'm interested to see what happens next, honestly, for both of these guys. Zach Reese versus Julian Marquez. I favored Zach Reese going into this. I knew he was going to take some harsh lessons away from that loss to Brundage. And, I mean, he stormed the gates against Julian Marquez, man. Stormed the gates. Point blank, period. You got to go back and just watch the fight for how long it is because it was the sequence that he landed to finish that fight was clean. Shoe polish clean, man. But good win for Zach Reese. That's ideally how he wanted his UFC debut to go. Nonetheless, he gets it here. Bruno Ferreira versus Dustin Stoltzfus. This finish was ridiculous, man. Ferreira came out swinging for the fences, trying to take Stoltzfus' head off. Almost sloppy. Not almost. It was sloppy at points, but he started catching Stoltzfus. Stoltzfus' initial pace began to slow, and Ferreira started timing those spinning back elbows. He landed one. It didn't have nearly as big of an effect on Stoltzfus as the finishing sequence, the finishing elbow. But it still rocked him on top of the pure physicality that Bruno Ferreira brought. Did not help this case because that second spinning elbow caught Stoltz was flush, like right above the eye, I think, or maybe in the middle of the face. And I mean, the referee stepped in before Stoltzfus even had a chance to fight his way back in, but I don't think it was a bad stoppage. That elbow, I think I heard it, honestly. I think I heard the sound it made when it landed. So, insane win from Bruno Fajea. I don't think it was a bad stoppage, even though the referee seemingly stepped in a bit premature. Stoltzfus seemed like he didn't know where he was. Probably the craziest finish of the card. Next, Raul Rosas Jr. versus Ricky Turcios. Turcios came out, no glove touch, all business, showing almost no respect to Rosas Jr. And for as long as the fight lasted, it was more or less just a crazy scramble fest, back and forth, both guys taking each other's backs, going for the rear naked. Rosas, I think his chin is a cheat code for defending rear nakeds, man. I really do. I'm saying that, lightly, treading that water lightly, but still, it seemed like Turcios couldn't do a thing to find that neck. And when he got Ricky's back, it was curtains. But I don't think this is a bad loss for Turcios. He showed that ferocity, that tenacity that he had on the Ultimate Fighter. I feel like if he brings that into all of his fights, it's gonna benefit him going forward. But Rosas Jr. is a legitimate problem and should be taken serious. The co-main event, Dominic Reyes versus Dustin Jacoby. I couldn't be more glad that one of my picks was wrong. Like, I'm so glad Dominic Reyes bounced back in the way he did with that knockout. He was getting pressured, landed that stop and pop, that step back, rear straight, that straight left hand, wobbled Jacoby and just followed up with a sick finishing sequence, dropped him with a knee, just didn't let up. He saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and he got to it. And what followed was like pure bliss amongst the entire MMA community, because this is a moment that we've essentially been waiting for far too long. And it was sweet, man. You see a guy who takes one of the all-time greats who's still active, pound for pound number one technically, the distance, and makes him look insanely human, only to go on one of the roughest 4-fight losing skids ever. So the bounce back victory is all the more sweet considering that. Happy for Dom Reyes. Curious to see where he goes from here. Great win. And then the main event. I'm going to have to elaborate on this because this stoppage really bothered me. Jared Cannonier has fought back from way tougher scenarios, way tougher shots. He's been rocked way worse without the fight being stopped. And, I mean, take him versus Whitaker, for example. He ate that 1-2 rear leg, stumbled back into the cage, face planted, and still fought his way back into that, and wound up hurting Whitaker to close out that third round. And we're going to stop this one against Nasruddin Imavov as he's actively trying to get back to distance with his hands up, protecting himself. We're going to step in and stop it at that point. What are we doing, man? I'm sorry. Like, I'm not trying to, pick a bias here. But even my pops, who doesn't necessarily watch MMA all that much, even he thought that stoppage was ridiculous. We've seen Jared Cannonier be way worse off and fight his way back into it, like, times 5. I don't know, man. I want to see these two run it back, but I don't think the UFC is going to book this fight again. I feel like Cannonier was maybe up 3-1 going into that 4th round, and that 4th round maybe could have been Imavov if it continued the way it was and closed out the round rather than the stoppage occurring. But I don't know, man. I don't like that stoppage. I don't. What do you guys think about that stoppage in the main event? I feel like Cannonier could have definitely been given more time to try and fight his way back in before the ref stepped in. Nonetheless, it's the ref's job to protect the fighter. That's what he's there for. But Be sure to drop a like for this recap. I'm going to have the Tyra Perez preview up at some point this week. Got a busy week ahead of me, so appreciate y'all as always, and I'll see you in the next one.